Right, here is our unfed starter that we took out of the refrigerator. Let it warm to room temperature. And what you need to do now is feed the starter and see if it has enough oomph within 3 hours to raise a loaf of bread. So you want to have a digital scale, have it to 0 on grams. You have to do this by weight, not by volume. 122 to 126 grams of starter is generally enough to feed to make a loaf of bread and have a little bit extra so that you have more starter to feed for next week's batch. So you measure out about 124, 126 grams. So we got a little bit too much. This is 136. I don't want to do that much because we'll have way, way, way too much. So take out, this is a very sticky starter. Okay, so that's 124 grams. And what you want to do is have 2 wide mouth jars. You have to have a discard jar and your regular jar that you want to incubate your starter in. So you take out the rest of your starter that you're not feeding. You can put it in a bowl or you can put it in your discard jar. You can use this again to start another batch after this one is done. You can use this to make waffles. All kinds of good recipes online that you can do with this is called discarded unfed starter. So going back to our fed starter, I have 124 grams. So now you want to do equal amount of water. So you zero your scale again. You put in 124 grams of significantly warm water, especially if the temperature is cold outside. So 124 grams of water. Okay, and then you do 124 grams of flour. However, 10 grams of it need to be rye flour. Because for some reason rye flour really makes a difference in the strength of your starter. So start with your 10 grams of rye flour. And then the rest of your 124 grams needs to be unbleached all-purpose flour. Do not use bread flour for feeding your starter, which is what we're doing now. We're feeding the starter. So 124 grams all-purpose unbleached flour. Don't use whole wheat flour. Okay, so there's our 124 grams. And that's it. You stir it. Get the starter all mixed in there. And then you put this back into your jar. And you can see why having a wide mouth jar is very helpful. And you can wash out your jar in between and sterilize it if you want. I usually do that, but for the sake of this video, I'm not doing that. Okay, so you cover your jar, and then you want to take a Sharpie and mark on the side of your jar about how high your starter is, so you know your starting point. So we're about right here, and it's 10:30, so you write down the time, and then you come back in 3 hours and see if it's doubled. It needs to double within 4 hours. I always check it at 3 hours, and if it has significantly risen, then you know that this starter has enough power to raise a loaf of bread, and then we would go ahead and make our bread dough at that point. Okay, you can see that we have waited our 4 hours and it has doubled in size. This is the starter that we had mixed earlier. So now we're going to actually make the bread now. What we do first is you take 227 grams of the ripe fed sourdough starter, and that's what this is. We had fed it earlier. So now it's ripe, so we're doing 227 grams. There should be enough left in the jar for us to feed another starter and keep it going for next week. So 227 grams. Okay, a little bit more. All right. And like I said, we will add some to this after we're done making the bread and start another batch of starter that will stay in the fridge for a week for next week's bread. So set that aside. And the next thing we add to the bread is 397 grams warm water. So zero your scale. And the water needs to be significantly warm. So 397 grams significantly warm water. And you have to do it by weight. I tried to do it by volume when I first started doing this, using cups and ounces, and it doesn't work. So if you don't have a scale, you need to get a scale. All right, there we go for the water. Now we need 5 cups of bread flour. It's important that you use bread flour, not all-purpose flour. You can use up to 1/3 of the amount with whole wheat flour, but no more than that or it won't rise. So we zeroed our scale again, and now 602 grams of bread flour. Okay, so I'm up to 488. I want to do some whole wheat, so I do the rest whole wheat up to 602. Okay, and then you do 18 grams of salt. So again, zero your scale and sprinkle in 18 grams of salt. There we go. And then we're going to mix this until it's a rough, sticky dough. So you just keep lifting and folding, stirring your edges down, stirring and stirring. I'm going to try and get all the dry flour mixed in. Okay, and then that's our dough. And what you're going to do, I don't let it rise in this bowl. I put it into a ceramic baking bowl. And that's just my preference. You could leave it in here to rise. I don't do that. I put it into a clean bowl. So you put it into your clean bowl, and then you need to cover it with saran wrap. And then again, you need to keep track of the time. So take your marker and write down the time. It's about 3:40, and you're going to come back in an hour and knead the dough. I need to get different flours. All right, ready? Okay, now we have our little bit of starter left. After putting our bread dough in to rise for an hour, we need to feed this again so that you have a batch ready to make bread next week. So zero your scale, put it on grams. And again, to feed the starter, you want 124 126 grams about. That should be enough, so that you have enough left over like this, so that you refeed to keep your starter going. Obviously, if you use all your starter up, you won't have any to make bread with the following week. So that's why you always want to do a little bit more than what you need for your bread. So this is 122 grams, so that's just fine. And then we do, if you remember, equal amount of water, so 122 grams of warm water. Okay, that was too much. I'm gonna pour some off. You want to be as accurate as you can. Doesn't have to be right on, but within a gram or two. Okay, so 122. Now we need 122 grams of flour. And again, the first 10 grams need to be rye flour. So zero your scale. Do 10 grams of rye flour. And then now you're back to using the all-purpose flour, unbleached, not bread flour. So 122 grams is your total. So we already put in the 10 of the rye, and now we're doing the rest in the all-purpose. So this is feeding the starter. Okay. And then you stir this. So this is your starter. You're feeding your starter. This is your bread dough that you already made. This is not bread. This is the starter. So it can get kind of confusing. You have to use different flours for the two different things. Bread flour and whole wheat flour in this one. All-purpose flour and rye flour in this one. Okay, so here's the fresh starter, and you want to put this. I'm going to go ahead and wash this jar out. You could just reuse it and leave all that scruff in there, but I like to wash it out and with super hot water, so the jar is pretty sterile before I put this in. And that should sit on your counter for an hour, so you can see it starting to work and bubble, and then you can put it in your fridge until next week. And you'll be all ready to start the whole process again. Clean jar. All right, so we have our fed starter here. Putting it in the clean jar. You can see I washed off the timing mark. So this will be our starter that we will use next week. Putting it into the clean jar. We're going to leave it sit on the counter for about an hour, just to make sure it starts to bubble and grow a little bit, just a tiny little bit, to make sure I didn't kill it by using too hot of water or something else weird that happened. I just like to make sure it's alive and active before I put it in the fridge, because then it goes dormant in the fridge for a week, and then it wakes up when you use it next week. So we'll set this on the counter for an hour so it can bubble, and then we'll put it into the fridge. Okay, so this has been sitting on the counter. It's alive, it's doing great, so it can go into the fridge now for a week, and we will take it out and next week and start the process all over again. You can keep your discard jar. This is discard that I had extra from other batches that I made. Again, you can use this for waffles or biscuits or all kinds of fun stuff. I also keep this in the refrigerator, and you can use it as you want to. You don't need to feed this. This is unfed starter, but there's lots of good recipes you can use this in. In the fridge, the starter will stay good for a week and a half. If you let it go 2 weeks without feeding it, you're really pushing it, and it might not come back to life again. So I make bread every week. I feed the starter every week. The discard lasts for ages and ages. It just gets stronger and stronger flavored, and it gives you that sourdough flavor in whatever you're making. Okay, it's been an hour. Our dough is in the bowl. We need to do our first kneading. So you need to have wet hands with cold water. What you do is you scoop around the dough, gently lift and fold. So this is a very gentle kneading where it's more of a lift and a fold. And don't worry if it's rough. Just go around all 4 sides, and you can lift it up and let its weight wiggle down so you get a little piece to fold over. And then you just pat it down, cover it up again, and wait for another hour and come back and do the second kneading in another hour. All right, we are back again after another hour. So I have wet hands, and we want to do another kneading. So you scoop around, lift and fold, lift and fold. And you can shake it a little so you get a little lift and fold. One more, lift and fold. Try to get all the dried ends tucked in so they can get re-moistened. And you cover it up and leave it for another hour. Ready? Okay, this is our third and last kneading. We had an hour separation about between kneading. So again, you put your hand under scoop, lift and fold, turn, lift and fold. You want to pop any big air bubbles you see. Turn, lift and fold. Right, and that is the last one. So now we put this in the refrigerator and let it rest overnight, and then we'll shape it, rise it, and bake it tomorrow.